Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I certainly hope that you've had a wonderful Christmas holiday and are on the way to having a wonderful new year. As always, I'm glad that you've chosen to spend a little time with me as we continue to talk about the big names in the Bible. Well, right before Christmas, we started talking about Jesus. And in our last lesson, we talked about the one episode that we have about Jesus growing up. When he was age 12, his parents took him to Passover in Jerusalem. It's a big festival for the Hebrew people, and everybody went. Well, when the Passover festival was over, Mary and Joseph assumed that Jesus was in the caravan of folks headed back to their hometown. After they had gone a day's journey, Jesus was nowhere to be found. So Mary and Joseph went back to Jerusalem and searched diligently for Jesus. And finally, they found him in the temple, engaging the religious leaders in some very serious conversation. And with that, the curtain falls on Jesus' childhood. We don't know really anything about him between the time he was age 12 and when he began his ministry. And that brings us to the subject of today's conversation. Namely, we're going to talk a little bit about Jesus' baptism. Now, three of our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, give us a description of Jesus being baptized. Because all three of them tell us the story, that means that it was very significant and very important. So let me tell you what I think Jesus' baptism means for us. First, one of the most important things that we can say about Jesus' baptism is that it made a clear dividing line between what was and what was to be. As I said a moment ago, we think Jesus was around 30 years old when he began his ministry. We know that he probably worked as a carpenter, having learned that trade from his father Joseph. Well, that's about all we know. And so there's a whole lot of lost years in Jesus' early life. We just don't know a whole lot about him. But suddenly he shows up in the wilderness where John the Baptist is preaching, and Jesus is baptized by John. And in essence, that baptism marks a dividing line between his previous life and now the time when he was going to embark on his ministry, when he was going to start doing what God called him to do. By being baptized, Jesus in essence was saying, the curtain has fallen on my old life and the curtain is raising on my new life and on my new mission. It signals that Jesus was starting something new. That's what his baptism meant. The second thing that we can say about Jesus' baptism is this. It demonstrated that he was all in on doing what God wanted him to do. Now, there are lots of different branches in the Christian tree. And if you travel around or if you do any research, you'll find that Christian churches all over the world sometimes do baptism very, very differently. In some churches, for example, they simply sprinkle water on the head of a person being baptized. Some other traditions will pour water over a person's head. And then still other traditions will fully immerse a person under the water and then raise them up. Scripture tells us or strongly suggests that Jesus was baptized in that last manner. In other words, Jesus was lowered under the water and then raised up. And so in doing that, it shows a very, very clear dividing line between his old life and his new life, but it also shows that he was fully immersed. Think about this. If you go swimming in the summer, you know what it's like to just jump in the pool and maybe wade around up to your chest or a little bit, but it's an entirely different thing to jump off the diving board into the deep end, where you go completely under the water and then claw your way back up to the surface. Well, baptism means that Jesus kind of jumped off the high dive and got himself fully immersed in God's work. It showed that he was 100% committed to doing what God wanted him to do. We use that word in describing lots of other things. We talk about somebody being immersed in their work, meaning that's all they're into, or we talk about them being immersed in some hobby or pastime. That means that they're all in. They're doing, spending a lot of time and energy on whatever it is. Well, Jesus, by being baptized, demonstrated that he was all in on what God wanted him to do. And the final thing is this: Jesus' baptism showed that he was humble. Now, according to some of our scripture passages related to Jesus' baptism, Jesus showed up and said to John, "I need to be baptized by you." And John says, "Whoa, wait a minute. Let's turn this around. I should be baptized by you. What in the world are you doing to come here and be baptized by me?" And Jesus said, "No, this is necessary. It's important that I do this." And so in essence, Jesus submitted to John's baptism. That is, he may or may not have needed it, but he said, "This is an important thing for me in my ministry and in my new life, and so I want you to baptize me." In other words, Jesus humbled himself. He recognized the importance of performing this action. He recognized that it wasn't all just about him and what he wanted, and instead it was about what God wanted. And so Jesus humbled himself and said, I have to do this because this is what God asks of me. Jesus put his ego aside in order to fulfill and launch his ministry. Well, that'll do it for today in terms of our discussion about Jesus' baptism. As always, if you have any questions, well, you know how to find me, and I'll be happy to talk about any of this with you at any time. In the meantime, I hope you have a good rest of the week. I know school is about ready to get started for many of you, and so I wish you well as you begin this part of the school year. In the meantime, you take care, and God bless, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.